The Manhattan night fell like a glittering black curtain. City lights casting bright frames across the wooden floor of the penthouse. Silas Blackwood, my husband, a man who more often makes decisions in a whisper than in a shout, leaned against the bar, lowered his eyes, and delivered a short, knife-sharp ultimatum: leave here tonight. Reflect seriously, and come back when you have a proper sorry. I, Juniper Hawthorne, looked straight at the wall clock reflecting my eyes in its glass, expressionless. I simply said, softly, okay. Then I picked up my phone, zipped my coat, and left like someone who has just signed a contract without bothering to read the fine print. The next morning, I returned with my own key. My side of the closet was as empty as a freshly cleared display bay. The hangers stood in neat ranks, cold and impassive. On Silas's desk sat a divorce packet beside a bizarre spending statement, items like staff gifts, late-night entertaining, urgent image consulting. The scent of polished wood lingered as it had the night before, but the air had changed color, a silence thick as the dust the rich never see. The narration in my head clicked on, clear and even as the second hand of the wall clock. For 12 years, I was the backstage for Silas's CEO image, tightening wording before he opened his mouth, cleaning up mistakes before they became crises, borrowing the credibility of my former profession, first lawyer, then consultant to cover the flaking patches in his inspirational leader portrait. Marriage, in Silas's eyes, was a deal. Commitment in exchange for control, dinner in exchange for silence, success in exchange for my gradual disappearance. Eleanor Blackwood, my mother-in-law, was always cold and proper, guarding appearances like someone guarding a storeroom key. And Brittany Hale, the young associate, was a shadow that passed down the hall long enough for her perfume to linger on someone else's collar. This house had an invisible rulebook, microaggressions wrapped in politeness, gaslighting mixed into compliments, boundaries relabeled as "for the family." From the moment I said okay, and the living room door closed behind me, I understood I wasn't leaving the fight. I was only stepping half a pace back to see everything clearly within my own line of sight, including the lines Silas had been drawing for years with an invisible pen. To recount it, I have to start with how he sows conflict, not with shouting, but with a habit of control wrapped in everyday objects. Mornings in the penthouse always began with a ritual I knew like the back of my hand. Set the machine to Americano, medium, temperature 195 degrees Fahrenheit. A white ceramic cup placed 2 centimeters off the spout so the foam doesn't spill. The weekly habit calendar printed the night before laid on the glass table. Beside it a stack of files to sign, yellow post-it labels with arrows pointing "sign here." Silas would pass by, touch my back like someone flipping a switch, exact pressure, exact spot, and say, "Good girl," with that smile that makes it hard to tell whether he's praising his wife or his assistant. I noted the guest schedule, adjusted a few spots in the deck for the board, sent 2 emails to erase last night's clumsy footprints of his, then set the table. Taken separately, these small gestures mean care. Put together, they become an invisible cord, tightening around a woman's shoulders in the elegant homes of Manhattan. I brought out breakfast, Silas said, exactly, in the deep CEO baritone used to approve a plan. Each exactly from him was another brick in the wall of definition. A good wife is a correct wife, and a correct wife doesn't create noise. Deal-making evenings at a midtown hotel were as busy as a scene change on stage. A thick carpeted lobby, warm lights spilling over round tables draped in white cloths. I sat to Silas's right, jotting down investor numbers as they dropped, ordering ahead so the kitchen wouldn't miss a beat, shaping the conversation to flow like water through the banquet. Brittany Hale arrived half a beat late, her neroli perfume preceding her by half a step. She smiled and, accidentally, shared, "Last time I was at your place, I loved the view from the bedroom facing the river. The oil painting in the study is perfect, the light from the right makes the surface look wet." I looked at Silas. He neither denied nor explained, just angled his chin the slightest degree like a man accustomed to calling leaks of private information adorable oversights. I joked with barbed velvet. Then next time, give us a heads up, so the painting doesn't get wet from a cleaning mix-up. That was the boundary I set with a half-joke, the kind of boundary women in America often use when they don't want to weigh down the air yet still keep their face. Silas cut me off on the spot, pivoting to transparency in governance. Under the table, his thumb pressed the back of my hand for a brief beat, just painful enough to send the message straight into the blood: be quiet. The server poured wine, Brittany raised her glass, and the pendant light drew a sharp ribbon of brightness across the rim. I took a small sip to swallow the sting below my sternum. Back home, Silas formatted the conversation exactly like a personnel discipline meeting. He stood straight by the kitchen island, leaning lightly against the stone, voice even, not raised: leave here tonight. Reflect seriously, and come back when you have a proper sorry. The order arrived with the posture of a procedure: no outrage, no theatrics, just cold and concise, like an as-discussed email. I answered, briefly, okay. I didn't cry, didn't smash anything, didn't ask why. Because I knew the answer, because I joked at the wrong time, because Brittany looked at me for more than 5 seconds after that remark, because Silas needed to re-establish the power structure before going to bed. I took a pillow to the living room, not locking the door as I usually did. Instead, I turned on every necessary light, brewed a pot of mint tea, opened my notebook, and drew 3 columns: assets, transaction history, traces. I went back through the statements that had once saved Silas when the press asked questions, the emails that had faded with the years, the contracts I had quickly reviewed. I wrote names, dates, and a irregularities column. I surrendered to the truth. The backstage role had left me with a trove of documentation I had never thought I would use for myself. The feeling of being pushed out of my own bedroom raised a strange gooseflesh, like a probationary employee told to go outside and reflect until you know how to value the opportunity. Here, the opportunity was marriage, and the job description always changed to suit the schedule of the person at the top. I thought of the women I met at the gym, in elevators, at fundraisers. They spoke of microcontrol with a light laugh, the "his just careful" kind. Then they adjusted their straps, put a hand on their phones, and checked email after hours like a programmed reflex. We learned to maneuver within a polite ecosystem where gaslighting wears a cardigan, compliments hide a performance review, and boundaries are turned into obstacles to the shared vision. I recalled a line from my notebook: team first is not self last. I added beneath it, marriage first is not wife last. In the days before that explosive night, I had already seen the milestones laid out. The guest calendar suddenly gained a 9:30 p.m. Mentorship with Brittany. External consulting charges coincided with Hampton's weekends. Eleanor's call reminding me to keep up appearances for the family. Don't overreact in front of outsiders. A sentence that is both advice and the tape across women's mouths used for generations. I tried dimming a few lamps, proposing to push Brittany's meetings into business hours, reminding that the hallway cameras should be set to alert, suggesting we add guest lists to the check-in system. Every piece of feedback was converted into thanks, later, which means never. And each time I brushed that safety line, Silas would pour another drink, say "you're too tense," and kiss my forehead like a little stamp reading handled. That night, when I fell into the living room silence, the sound of Manhattan through the glass was different, no longer the backdrop to parties, but a pulse independent of my marriage. I listed the things in my name that now lay somewhere out of reach. My old practice files, savings pooled together, personal items tidied away. I called a friend at my former law firm, sent a single line: "I need coffee tomorrow." She replied with 3 words: "Here, 8 a.m. I set the alarm for 6:15, left my pen on an open page. If someone sends you out of your home to study, let them study a full curriculum. I dimmed the lights, leaving only the floor lamp by the armchair, a soft gold that made the room look more like a waiting lounge than a place of punishment. In the morning, I woke before the alarm and made coffee for myself for the first time in months, without calibrating to anyone else's taste. Steam blurred against the pane. I folded the light blanket, slipped the pillow back into its case, and tidied the living room the way I tidy a hotel room after a business trip, a habit that reminds me I still decide. I returned to the bedroom for clothes, my hand meeting the emptiness on my side of the closet, hangers cold like the metal edge of a ferry dock. The emptiness didn't make me falter, it revealed a path. If I've been turned into a probationary employee in my own home, I will sign a new contract with myself in which I am the principal. At that midtown dinner, when Brittany laughed that she loved the bedroom view, I'd understood that anything private can be renamed image assets at any time. At home, when Silas pinched my hand under the table, I realized that the language of power isn't in volume but in cadence. He spoke slowly, clearly, so I could hear myself getting smaller. So I chose a different tempo. Fast in deciding to leave the bedroom, slow in gathering evidence, steady in breathing. I wrote a list of non-negotiables: no mentoring after 7 p.m. In the home, no one, not even my mother-in-law, enters when I'm absent. No adjusting my emotions for the family's image in front of outsiders. They sound simple, but in a house accustomed to invisible services from women, they are new lines of code, pushing the old operating system into error mode. I know the real confrontation will come, but I also know I've changed the stance. From the one who keeps time for a CEO's image, I've become the one who keeps time for myself. And when you keep time for yourself, you no longer run to anyone else's stopwatch. Notebook folded, I tucked it into my bag and stepped into the corridor lit by cool green exit signs. Today, I needed a full toolkit. A lawyer, the bank, entry-exit logs, an inventory of assets, and a silent extraction plan. A way out quiet enough that the ones left behind would think they still had control. The first appointment was with Margaret Winters, who specializes in divorces involving equity and reputation. Her office sits on an upper floor of a midtown building, black and white photos of old Manhattan on the walls. She didn't beat around the bush, poured black coffee, and slid a bolded checklist across to me: bank statements for the past 3 years, photos of any physical evidence in the home, emails related to unusual spending, lobby camera data, if the building allows extraction, the prenuptial agreement if any. I shook my head at the last item. She nodded as if she'd expected it, underlined a few lines, her voice steady: "We'll build with paper. Paper doesn't get scared." She asked what I wanted. I answered, freedom and clear boundaries. No hunting anyone down, no dragging each other through the mud. She wrote tone in the corner of the page, then smiled. Good. I'll hold that tone for you. Step 2 was money and paperwork. I went to the bank we've always used and met with Patricia, the longtime manager who's seen enough kinds of love and money to know when to be discreet. I said I needed a new account under my legal name, to separate my transactions from the joint accounts. Patricia asked nothing further, pulled up a screen, worked quickly, then slid a stack of forms for me to sign. "I'll enable alerts if there are unusual transfers out of the joint account," she said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "And here's a printout of transactions for the last 2 quarters. Lines for wellness, coaching, consulting after hours appeared, totaling enough to build a new kitchen." In them, Brittany's name showed up in payment memos for several spa shops and a conference weekend hotel pass in Montauk. Patricia tapped the edge of the paper lightly. "Money tells the truth, people don't. Let the money talk." I folded the printout, slipped it into a plastic sleeve, and thanked her. As I stepped out through the glass doors, cold wind swept the sidewalk. I felt lighter for having put a stroke of the pen in the right place. Next came the doorman's logbook. I returned to the building and greeted Thomas, who has stood anchor steady in the lobby for years. He looked at me for a beat, understood right away from the smallest nod. We went into the management office. Thomas opened the entry-exit ledger: dates, times, who came, who sent flowers, who asked for a package to be forwarded. A few lines reading "Delivery to Miss Hale" made my pen pause, not exactly a surprise. Only the sense of pieces meshing like hour and minute hands meeting at 12. "No one reads this book but us," Thomas said, "but if you need a copy for your lawyer with proper paperwork, I'll cooperate." I nodded. On the desk was a temporary access card. Thomas slid it into my hand and whispered, "When you need to move things at a quiet hour, tell me groceries delivered." I squeezed his hand in thanks, remembering the times I brought holiday tips to the security team. As it turns out, simple, decent relationships are the anchor lines when you need them. The hard part was reclaiming sentimental assets, the kind others easily label trivial, but that are essential if I'm to walk out without going hollow. I took a notebook and went room to room as if inventorying a gallery. The wine cellar, marking bottles I picked with my father on a Napa Road trip, the signed book collection, a few test prints, the crazed glazed ceramic plate my mother sent from Michigan. In the dressing room drawer, my grandmother's emerald ring, once said to be misplaced somewhere, lay in a small velvet box under a layer of handkerchiefs. I opened the lid. The deep green stone was like a still drop of ink, catching light when I tilted my hand. I placed the ring in a zip pouch, labeled it with the date, took photos, and sent them to Margaret at once. "Recovered." She replied, within 2 minutes, "Save the photos in 2 places. Bring it with you when you leave." I moved on to the shelf of handwritten case notes, pages I wrote when I still practiced, notes from matters I handled. I gathered them into a lidded box. Everything I touched was a part of me I had let fade in the shadow of an inspirational CEO image. Now I was bringing them back into the light. The extraction plan needed to be as quiet as a scene change in a theater, no jostling, no drawing attention. I called the movers who had handled art pieces for me before. We set a twilight appointment, and they brought a truck wrapped in a flower shop logo to avoid the gaze of the new guards. The code for the doorman was "Groceries delivered on the way in and dinner ready on the way out." I packed the first 3 boxes. College photo albums, my father's books with pencil notes in the margins, handwritten drafts, passport files, old professional certificates, the only things I carried from the earlier life that was mine. I didn't touch the items that trigger childish anger, electronics, or Silas's favorite speakers. My goal was to get out intact, without dragging a storm behind me. Between runs in the service elevator, I stopped by the desk, backed up a few key emails from my personal account, emails from quick reviews of pitches, times I tightened copy before Silas spoke. I wasn't looking for scandal, I was simply preserving my own record, in case someone tried to cast me as a disillusioned wife making things up. I slipped an old photo into my bag, a shot of my mother and me sitting on the steps of our old house in Detroit, both hands around a crazed porcelain mug like a thread back toward calm. My phone buzzed, a message from Margaret, confirming she'd sent a request to freeze certain expenditures and asking the building to preserve lobby camera data within the retention window. "Don't confront today," she advised, "let paper do paper's work." By late afternoon, I went back to the bank, opened a small safe deposit box, and placed inside the emerald ring, my passport, my mother's will, and copies of the new account records. I signed my name Juniper, the one on my birth certificate, and recalled Patricia's line, "Money tells the truth." I whispered the other half, "And paper doesn't get scared." When the heavy steel door closed, the sound was very soft yet firm, like a commitment I'd signed with myself. Night fell. The flower shop arrived right on time. Thomas keyed the service elevator, the glowing tip of a guard's cigarette smoldered by a cart in the courtyard corner. Upstairs, the 2 movers wore soft cotton gloves, carefully lifting each box. "Groceries delivered," one said into a small radio. I eased the door without letting it creak. Silas wasn't back yet. The TV in the living room showed its idle screen. The LED strip along the bar shifted colors slowly. I passed without lingering, afraid familiarity would slow my hands. The second box held my father's books, volumes he left on a visit, each jacketed. The third was photos and drafts. I labeled them and wrote, "Fragile Personal" in thick marker. As a mover carried a box out, He looked back at me and gave the slightest nod. I returned it, thinking of the quiet motions that keep this world on its rails. The last task before leaving was a careful visual sweep. Wine cellar locked, storage cabinets closed, items I wasn't taking left undisturbed. I opened the wardrobe for a second, not to mourn the empty space, but to remind myself that life doesn't live in there. On the desk I left a small slip of paper, one line only, received. No explanation. No tally of favors. The handwriting like a delivery acknowledgement. I am the one signing myself out to myself. I texted Margaret, dinner ready, the code for finished. Thomas replied, all set. I pulled the door, heard it seal smoothly, no rubber squeal. This rich house was designed, so every door opens and closes without drawing notice. I didn't go straight to the hotel. I stopped by the river, where wind threads under the bridge and lights skip across the surface. I sat on a stone bench, opened my notebook, and checked off Margaret's checklist. Statements yes, photos yes, emails yes, logbook pending paperwork, assets recovered, safe deposit done. Extraction quiet. I added one last line at the bottom. Don't yank other people's strings, only untie my own. My phone buzzed with a note from Patricia. Alert set. Sleep easy, Juniper. I smiled and put the phone away. In this city, you're rarely told to sleep easy. Tonight I accepted it like a key to a room no one can throw me out of again. When I reached the small hotel in the West Village, the receptionist handed me an envelope Margaret had couriered over a temporary standstill letter, notifying all parties that no shared assets may be moved without agreement. I signed for it, locked the envelope in the room safe, sat on the bed, took off my shoes, and let my bare feet sink into the soft carpet. I ordered a bowl of hot soup and turned on the bedside lamp. In the warm light, I looked back on the day, the women who helped me, the lawyer, the bank manager, the doorman who held the door, and myself, learning to sign my name again. I sent a single message to Margaret, I'm ready tomorrow. Then I turned out the light, letting the city run on its horns and lights, while I slept soundly in a room whose door opens only when I want it to. The next morning in the West Village, I folded the hotel blanket as neatly as I used to on business trips, looked at the checklist with every box ticked, and understood. This was no longer the time for gathering things up, but the time to lay everything out on a brightly lit table so people used to living by neon lights would be forced to look into white light. I arrived at the conglomerate's headquarters earlier than usual. The marble lobby gleamed, the scents of cedarwood and freshly roasted coffee mingled. The front desk staff greeted me as they always did, the CEO's wife, access badge still valid. The elevator slid smoothly up to the top floor. Silas's office door was ajar, the motorized blinds were half drawn, Manhattan's sky spread flat like a pale gray page. I set down my bag, took off my coat, and arranged the desktop as if staging a one-woman show. In front of his chair, I placed a black folded divorce file, and on top of it, a forensic summary financial investigation report prepared by Margaret in coordination with a forensic accounting firm within 48 hours. Arrows showing money flowing from company accounts to wellness and consulting after hours, ending at Brittany Hale's card. Clipped behind were photos of hotel invoices for a conference weekend. The room number matching the day's Silas was busy with mentorship. I didn't stick on a red evidence label. I didn't stamp anything, just fastened a slim clip, letting neatness say what needed to be said. This isn't noise, this is truth. Next to the file, I set a small card, white border, black ink. See you in reality. I stepped back half a pace and glanced once more. Leather chair, building model, the limited edition fountain pen he liked to show off, the framed photos with other CEOs at gala dinners. Everything was as luxurious as ever, except that among those glossy objects there were a few sheets of paper that weren't glossy and were heavy. I left nothing else, no theatrics, no greeting. Then I left by the service elevator, the route I always chose whenever I needed to be invisible. In the afternoon, I returned to our building. Thomas gave the slightest nod, all set. I went straight up and opened the door with my own card. The air in the apartment was as cold as a hall after an event. On my side of the wardrobe, empty hangers, the shelves missing my father's penciled-in books. The remaining frames holding rectangular blanks faint with old sunlight. Small sounds, the AC, the wine fridge clicking, were as audible as the minute hand in a closed room. I walked past, set the key in the porcelain bowl on the console table, then sat in the armchair, waiting for the man long accustomed to coming home to everything laid out for him. Close to 7 o'clock, the door beeped. Silas came in, loosened his tie, and swept his eyes around. He called my name the way you call an assistant late on a deadline. June? No response. He called again, irritation mixed with confusion. He looked at the empty closet, the bare shelves, the cold wood floor, the faint dent in the chair by my wardrobe. There was a mild scent of alcohol on him. His leather shoes thudded faster as he passed the kitchen. June, where are you? He stopped when he saw me sitting in the pool of the floor lamp. I smiled like someone who has just put a parcel back in the right slot in a warehouse. Here. He dropped his key into the porcelain bowl. The metal on glaze rang sharp. What do you think you're doing? He growled, then quickly slipped back into the familiar CEO role. You know I can call every lawyer in this city. You won't win. I tilted my head and pointed to the phone on the table. Go ahead. Or let me help. I called Margaret and switched to speaker. Her voice came through low and clear. Evening. Mr. Blackwood. This is Margaret Winters, representing Juniper. I'd like to confirm 2 things. 1. The divorce file and forensic report have been sent in digital form to your counsel and the board. 2. From here on, all communications should go through counsel. Oh, and there's a preservation order for lobby camera data and the logbook, along with a request to freeze certain expenditures. Please do not delete anything, as that would be a crime. Silas opened his mouth, then closed it. Are you threatening me? Margaret replied evenly. This is procedure. Procedure threatens no one. I turned off speaker and set the phone down. The room felt depressurized. Silas leaned back against the edge of the kitchen island, trying to cling to the old script. You're humiliating me. You want me to lose face with the board. I stood, neither moving closer nor farther, holding the exact distance to see his eyes. You humiliated yourself, I said. I just pulled the curtain. He threw out a familiar line. You're going too far. Do you know the consequences? I shrugged, calm like matte varnish over wood. I know every spending line, every mentorship after 9:30, every conference weekend. And I know the names of the people who'll receive the file both inside and outside the company. I don't want to take anyone down, I just want this to stop. He gave a dry laugh. You're doing this out of jealousy. Brittany has nothing to do with it. I chuckled, not cruelly. I'm doing this out of clarity. And because no one gets to use company money to pay for someone else's wellness and then tell the wife to keep quiet for the sake of a shared vision. He yanked his phone from his pocket, scrolling for someone to call. I lifted a hand, like reminding a noisy student, before you call, remember the board already has the file. He halted mid-motion, lowered his hand slowly, and stared through me as if trying to burn a hole in the air. I didn't draw it out. From my bag I took a small envelope and set it on the island. The secondary elevator card, the gym card, the key to my sides drawer. My things have been moved. Anything I didn't take is labeled. He asked, where are you going? Me, somewhere the door opens only when I want it to. He pivoted, we can work this out. No need to make a scene. I looked at him for a long beat, letting him see that the person facing him was no longer the backstage editor smoothing his lines. No one's making a scene, I said softly. You've just been hearing things too softly for too long. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, an internal extension. I knew legal had received the file. He hit decline, then tried another threat. I can hire an entire PR team. You'll be labeled a vindictive wife. I shrugged. Go ahead. I answer with paper. PR can't edit numbers. He fell silent. The board might be his stage, but I had the light switch. I walked toward the door, touched the handle, then turned back. "One more thing," I said, not raising my voice, just enough to reach what it needed to. "Tonight, you go out and reflect." His face twitched, just slightly. I smiled, handing him his old line back, with one detail corrected for the roles. "When you have a proper apology, send it to my lawyer." I opened the door. The hallway air was cool as a gulp of cold water. Behind me, the rich man's home was silent like a stage just gone dark. Only the green exit sign still glowing. The elevator fell smoothly. I pressed the lobby button, my phone buzzed. "Margaret, board email logged. Turn in early. Thomas, car's ready." I stepped onto the street, exhaust-laced air mixed with the smell of pretzels from the corner cart. Above, windows lit and dimmed like a giant control panel. I wasn't trembling at all. From here on, each step would be a line on paper. And paper, as Margaret said, doesn't get scared. In the car, I opened my notebook and added a new line under the done list: transparency trap activated. I looked out the window and watched Manhattan slide by like a film reel. Familiar scenes turned strange because I was no longer the one staging them. On the back seat, the envelope with the elevator and gym cards lay tidy. On the phone screen, a received message from company counsel glowed green. I leaned back and let my shoulders drop. Tonight, I didn't need to win an argument, I just needed to stand on the side of reality. And reality is bright enough to make even those confident in the dark squint. The night I left the penthouse by the service elevator and texted activated to Margaret, I thought the silence would last a few days. But the next morning, the knock at the hotel door shattered that still surface and urgent rhythm, like the way people knock when everything in their life is about to crash to the floor. Brittany stood in the hallway, no makeup, hair hastily pinned, a trench coat too big as if borrowed from someone else. She said sorry to bother you, while still holding the edge of the door as if afraid she no longer had a place to stand. "They've cut off my accounts," she panted, "the company card is frozen, the internal email has disappeared. Legal sent an addendum NDA if I open my mouth, they'll sue." I opened the door, invited her to sit by the window, and set down a glass of water. I didn't hug her, and I didn't scold her. I poured the water slowly like pouring a flame back into a glass, so it wouldn't spill across the floor. Brittany told how she'd been called up to the top floor last night, sat in an icily cold conference room, an HR person read the confidentiality protection clauses. A lawyer listed the risks of betraying the company. Silas was not present. I thought I knew the law, she laughed bitterly, but it turns out I only knew which shoes fit the party. I set Margaret's business card in front of her. "If you want, call her. This isn't forgiveness, this is closing your file." Brittany looked at the card like looking at a plank in a pool while sinking, took it, and nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll pay." I shrugged. "Your freedom is the first fee." At noon, I got an unexpected message. Eleanor wanted to meet at an old tea room on Madison. She arrived on time, hair perfectly brushed, a camel wool coat, gloves removed and laid on the table like an old ritual. Without small talk, she placed a brown file bag on the table and slid it toward me. "The safe I keep now, you should see it," she said, her voice thin but steady. In the bag were hush settlements, job transition support, confidentiality fees, emergency image consulting for the shadows who had passed through Silas's life over 12 years of marriage, a string of figures connecting one hotel room to another dorm, from conferences to personal mentorship. Each document had a frightened signature on one side, and a familiar one on the other. "We indulged power," Eleanor said slowly, eyes on the rim of her teacup, as if looking me in the eye would make the words heavier. "I protected the family by powdering over the cracks. I was wrong." I heard the words, "I was wrong," fall like a stone onto a frozen lake, not shattering, but fissuring a long line. I didn't console her. I simply folded the file bag, slipped it into my purse, and nodded. "I'll put it in the case file," I said. She nodded, put her hands on her gloves, and put them back on, as if donning a familiar role that now felt tight. "You can hate me," she said before rising. I answered plainly, I don't have time to hate. I'm busy putting the right names on things. Mediation took place in a high glass room, light strewn across the table like a dusting of powder. 2 sides, 2 lawyers, a mediator whose gaze was like an X-ray. There were no tears, only paper. Silas's side pushed in a stack of proposals for asset transfer conditional on silence. Margaret pushed back, clipping each invoice, each photo, each line of the statements. The items Silas once dismissed: little wellness expenses, late-night flower deliveries, a conference trip that coincided with my birthday suddenly became the tax pinning the stack tight, each one a dent. The mediator asked, "What does your side wish to keep?" I looked at the list and pointed to my rural portion of this city life. Manuscripts, my father's books, the jade ring, a few art pieces I bought with my own money, and half the lawful marital assets. I slid a small packet towards Silas. The honeymoon album, a few Polaroids. These, I said lightly, like talking about the weather, for you to keep. The people in the photos are gone. Silas gave a dry smile, then fell silent, his fingers tapping the leather chair arm, the beat he uses when trying to invent a justification. Margaret changed key like a conductor. We request that you stop any NDAs that gag former employees regarding misuse of company funds. Your side has the right to remain silent, but not the right to force others to be silent. A week later, the board convened an emergency meeting. I wasn't in that room, but I knew its sound. Chairs scraping over thick carpet, glasses set on saucers, soft coughs before the right question that makes someone's shoulders dip. Silas was suspended pending an internal investigation. The interim replacement was the longtime COO, the one who had smiled kindly at me at the year-end party. Brittany was called in as a witness, her mentorship KPI those 9:30 p.m. Sessions was questioned like a misaligned spreadsheet. What was the objective? How were results measured? What was the impact? She fell apart before the quantitative questioned the way spreadsheets flip over what seemed to be merely inspiration. A board member said the sentence everyone fears to hear: we don't govern by aura. We govern by data. I was at home, cooking a simple pot of soup, phone face up on the table. A message from Margaret arrived just as I sprinkled salt. Suspended. Audit committee engaged. I set the spoon down and listened to it touch the pot's rim, light but final. Amid meetings and emails, people were still people. Brittany texted me after meeting her lawyer: I've signed with another firm, junior role, lower pay. But I can sleep. I replied, sleep is profit. Eleanor sent a single late-night text: I will transfer part of my personal assets to repay the wrongful benefits. You don't need to thank me. I didn't thank her. I only sent back a photo of the jade ring now in my safe, with the line, the object is back in the right place. She replied, one syllable, but heavy. On the day of final signatures, I arrived early and sat by the conference room window looking down at the street. Manhattan looks different when you're no longer living on someone else's studio lot. It doesn't blink to lure you in, it stands still like a map you can chart yourself. Silas came in later, thinner, his loosened tie like an excuse. He signed where Margaret indicated, his hand trembling for a beat at the clause, commitment not to tamper with witnesses. I didn't scrutinize him. When someone is already at the edge, you don't push, you let them learn their own swimming lesson. When he finished, he looked at me, about to say something, maybe, I'm sorry, maybe, if only. But his lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder and reminded him with a look, silence. I stood, capped my pen, closed the file, and said the last sentence I still owed myself: good luck with reality. That evening, I walked back to the hotel, past a used bookstore. I bought a lined notebook with a dark brown cover, thinking of starting to write my work differently, not cleaning someone's image, but building procedures for places that respect boundaries. I received an email from a non-profit in community arts. They wanted operations, consulting, with the first condition in the letter being no emails after 8 p.m. I smiled to myself under a yellow light at the intersection, thinking of the line, Aura can't save data, true at the office, True in a marriage, true in any lit room. When data returns to its proper place, people feel less alone, because everyone stands on the same foundation, a flat one, not tilted toward whoever speaks the loudest. At the hotel, I spread the files on the table and texted Brittany. Tomorrow, send your resignation letter in your own words. No need to tell the story. The paper will tell it, she replied with an envelope emoji. I texted Eleanor, sleep early. She wrote back 2 words, we'll try. I closed the laptop, turned off the light, and opened the window to let the night breeze in. The city outside kept running, an ambulance wailed, then quieted, a dog barked a few times, then stopped. I touched the jade ring in my coat pocket, and felt my heart soften a notch in a strange way. Not soft for Silas, not soft for the frozen wellness expenses, but soft for myself, for someone who has learned that sometimes you don't need to speak louder. You just need to hold the mic close to the truth and let it sound steady. I closed my eyes for a beat, knowing that when the courtroom door opened, my name would be called correctly. Not as a supporting role in someone else's story, but as the one standing with rightful title on a surface of facts gone still. On the morning of court, New York was cool, the stone steps before the courthouse still damp with dew. The courtroom wasn't noisy, only the sound of pages turning and shoes on the floor. The judge read the decision in an even voice, like someone reading instructions for installing a new door frame. Restore the name Juniper Hawthorne on all documents. Award the lawful share of assets according to statute, including compensation for career disruption, due to years of unpaid, behind-the-scenes work. Affirm independent rights to finances and residence. Require the other party to terminate all agreements that forced silence on personnel related to wrongful expenditures. Each sentence was a brick resetting the foundation. Solid, level, leaving no gap for hazy excuses. I signed the final record with my own name, the feeling of pen to paper like a stitch closing a tear that had run 12 years. When I walked out of the courtroom, there was no applause, only a shaft of sunlight across the lobby, warm enough for my shoulders to drop a notch. I looked for a new space the way Americans often do after a life change. Not too big, close enough to a park to hear the leaves, far enough from the center to work in peace. A small office on the Upper West Side, the 3rd floor of a brownstone, windows opening onto canopies of shade, became the place I began again. I set a plain wooden desk, 2 canvas sling chairs, a low bookshelf, a small coffee maker, and a whiteboard on the wall. The name on the glass door, Juniper Hawthorne Advisory. The tagline, from the guest seat to the head seat. Each morning, I opened the door, hung up my coat, boiled water, switched on a warm floor lamp like a kitchen light in someone's home, then laid out on the desk freshly printed packets, a safe exit checklist, instructions for properly requesting lobby camera footage, a standstill letter template for joint accounts, a 7-step departure runbook. I don't teach anyone to take revenge. I teach how to leave a room whose door has only ever opened from the other side. The first clients came like early birds darting across a cold sky. A woman in banking with watchband marks pressed into her wrist from sleeping in an office chair, an art teacher carrying a file pouch stuffed on a midnight rush. A mother of 2 who remembered every family expense but couldn't recall the last time she bought something for herself. We sat in the 2 canvas chairs with the simple wooden table between us. They spoke, I listened, then marked in red the lines to keep, the funds to separate, the people to notify in proper order. I handed them the safe exit checklist. I wrote myself, photograph every item of sentimental value, 3 years of statements, open an account under your birth name. Request a doorman logbook copy with proper paperwork, a nearby safe deposit box, a backup phone card, short lines to keep from getting dragged into arguments. Each night my phone lit with terse, code-like messages. I changed the locks. Logbook ready. Safe deposit opened. I replied with compact lines. Sleep. Print copies tomorrow. Freedom doesn't need noise. I also built a compact community, a weekly email bulletin, each issue with one theme. Money tells the truth, people don't. Paper doesn't know fear. Boundaries are a white fence. not a high wall. In each issue, I included a letter template and 3 rules: say little, write enough, save under a clear name. One autumn evening, I got a hurried call at 11. I'm in the hallway, just changed the locks. My hands are still shaking. I told her to stand under the light, breathe in for 4 counts, and read her own name out loud. The line went quiet, then she gave a small laugh. I can read it now. Calls like that came and went, leaving me with a quiet gratitude. It turns out, some kinds of work are measured by a heart rate returning to normal. I gradually returned to myself in the most basic sense. A person who wakes to an alarm clock, not to the soft shout of a marital deadline. A person who walks into the kitchen to brew coffee to her own taste. A person who schedules work with the clause no email after 8 p.m. as a promise of respect. Each afternoon I walked along the Hudson with a notebook, jotting ideas for a book people kept telling me I should write. I didn't want to write it like an indictment. I wanted to write it like a user guide for doors: how to turn a knob, how to measure hinges, how to change a lock, how to put up a white fence. I titled it, The Guest Room Revolution. Because I'd learned that when someone tries to make you a guest in your own home, the quietest revolution is to move chairs, change the name on the door, and lead yourself out of the dusty spare seat. For the launch, I chose the ballroom in the same hotel where one night, during a deal dinner, I'd been pinched under the table to keep quiet. This time, the lights were still warm, the mirrors still gleamed, the carpet still thick, only the roles had changed. The signing table stood in the center, the mic was sound-checked, rows of water set neatly. I tested the mic and said a short line. Thank you to the rooms that taught me this lesson. You don't have to shout to be heard. The guests weren't many. A few of my first clients, some old friends. A group of women with notebooks, an elderly couple holding hands in the 3rd row. In the front row, Thomas the doorman from the old building sat upright, hands on his knees, his uniform no longer a way to disappear but a tidy pride. He nodded when I looked down, the measured nod of someone who has opened doors for hard decisions. In the back I saw Eleanor without pressure, without the mother-in-law role, leaning against a pillar, eyes damp but lips pressed so as not to be the center. She gave the smallest nod when I reached the part about putting the right names on things. The book talks about concrete things, sample emails, checklists, survival lines, legal terms translated into everyday language. But between those pragmatic lines, I left room to breathe, space for readers to know that peace isn't a reward, it's a prerequisite. After the event, a woman of a certain age came to me and said, I've been in the guest room for 20 years. I clasped her hand, didn't ask why, and handed her a small slip that said do steps 1, 2, 3. She smiled. Tonight I'll write my name 10 times. I said, like a muscle exercise. Then it gets strong. The new work grew without noise. I added a weekend clinic, 10 people at a time, walking through each step, printing materials on heavy paper, so their hands would feel steady. I linked up with several attorneys, a conscientious bank manager, and a group of longtime doormen, forming a lifeline anyone could grab. I built a simple website, white background, black text, not selling inspiration, selling an itinerary. The emails kept coming. I changed the locks, paired with, I slept 7 hours. Those lines, more than any contract, are my KPIs. Eleanor drops by the office sometimes, unannounced. She doesn't stay long. She leaves an envelope for a small fund I set up to help pay for safe deposit boxes for those who need them, and goes. Once she stood at the window and spoke as if to herself. We indulged power and dropped other people's daughters. At my age, relearning how to be an adult isn't too late. I nodded and didn't lecture. Some lessons only sink in from within. One night, I received a blurry photo from Brittany, a new desk, a small potted plant, a monitor showing a contract from her new firm. Below it, emails after 8 p.m. bounce. I'm not upset. I seen it, and left a tiny smiling face. That's how we talk. Little, just enough. When winter came, I replaced the sign on the door with a warmer carved wood plaque. I put a vase of white tulips in the corner, and updated the file set with a section on sentimental items. Because it turns out what keeps people in the guest room isn't only money, but picture frames, a sweater, the sound of a spoon on a morning cup. I learned to ask, "What do you want to take, so your heart isn't left behind?" The answers opened up things so beautiful they warmed the whole room. On the last day of the year, I tidied up, unplugged the coffee machine, turned off the floor lamp, and drew the curtains. On the desk remained the plan for next year: a class on resigning from the supporting role, a Spanish edition launch in a small community, another session with doormen across the city on helping residents leave safely. I locked the door, slipped the key in my pocket, and walked through the park. On the bridge, cold wind slid under my collar, the city glittered like an electrical map. I touched my coat pocket where the jade ring sat snug. I smiled to myself, knowing that tomorrow, when someone knocks on the little Upper West Side office door, I'll brew a strong, balanced coffee, hand over a sheet of thick paper, and say, "We start with your name." Because after everything, recovery isn't going back to how it was. Recovery is changing seats from guest to head and keeping your back straight while reading your name aloud in a room bright enough. On a season crossing night, I closed the door of my small office on the Upper West, walked through the park, and looked up at the distant strip of lights like a giant control panel. In that moment, I understood the journey had come full circle. The next morning, I stood before the glass of the penthouse from years ago, no longer a guest in my own life, just an ordinary person who knows how to call herself by her right name. In my head, the voiceover rang clear: "The day you told me to leave home to learn a lesson. I really did learn, but the one late to class was you." That lesson sounds simple yet direct. First, document let the surfaces glow online. But in the conference room, the facts do the talking. Second, don't argue when the other person is performing, let the system speak. Banks, emails, receipts. Third, change seats, leave the guest chair and sit in the chair that signs the contract for your own life. Fourth, know how to leave on time. Okay, is sometimes not surrender, but pressing the button to execute a plan. Fifth, don't turn resentment into a career. Close the file, open your life. I placed my hand on the cool window frame, breathed evenly, and thought of the people who had knocked on my office door, the ones who texted I changed the locks. I slept. I slept. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this story. Each read, a nod, a short comment, each is a small light guiding someone walking in the dark. If you're still sitting in the guest room of your own home, copy the checklist below the description, keep it in your pocket, and when you're ready, stand up and change rooms. I'll be there, in a room bright enough, pouring you a strong, balanced coffee, and gently reminding you, your name is yours, read it out loud.